So I think one really powerful way to for me to understand aliveness is to think about to go into a darker territory is to think about suicide. And I've known people in my life who suffer from clinical depression.
Yeah.
And whatever the chemistry is in our brain, there is a certain kind of feeling that is to be depressed, where you look in the mirror and ask, do I want to kill myself today? This is the question that Camus asks. This question, this philosophical question. And there is people who, when they're depressed, say, not only do they say, I want to kill myself or I don't, they say, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And that's chemistry. That's whatever that is. That's chemistry in our mind. And then on the flip side of that, for me, I've had some low points, but I've been very fortunate to not suffer from that kind of depression. I am the opposite, which is not only moments of peak performance in athletics or great music or any of that. I'm just deeply joyful often by mundane things. Like, as you were saying it, I was drinking this thing and it's cold. And for some reason, the coldness of that was like, oh, great. Like refrigeration. I don't know. There was a joy in that. Like, I can't put it into words, but I just felt great. And then just so many things. You look out in nature, there's a nice breeze and just like, it's amazing. So that doesn't feel like I'm embracing the absurd. That seems like I'm getting some nice like dopamine hits in whatever the chemistry is from just the basics of life. And that is the source of aliveness. However my brain is built, it's gotten a natural sort of mechanism for aliveness. Yeah. And so one nice way to see the absence of aliveness is to look at the clinical depression. And so that Camus doesn't seem to contend with that at all in asking the question of suicide. Because when you look in the mirror and ask, like if I ask myself, do I want to kill myself today? I ask that question in a different way, more like a stoic way often, like basically every day is, what if I die today? It's more like contemplating your mortality every single day. That excites me. The possibility that this is my last day, that, it just reminds me how amazing life is. And that's chemistry. I don't know what that is, but that's certainly not some kind of philosophical decision I made. I am a little bit riding a wave of the chemistry of the genetics I've been given, of the dopamine. So that question of suicide, by the way, do you find that formulation of the question of existentialism, I know you didn't want to teach it because obviously suicide is a very difficult word, especially for young minds, but do you think that's a useful formulation of the question of existentialism? Like him saying, this is the most important question of suicide.
I think there is something to it. If you read the question as the question, what is it in virtue of which it ought to be desirable to live the lives that we're capable of living? That's a deep question. Yeah, that's a question that gets focused when someone asks themselves whether they ought to continue to live that life. Who would the famous line, nothing focuses the mind more than one's impending execution? I think there's something important about that recognizing the riskiness and the vulnerability of one's existence is super important. And the idea, and I think that if we didn't have that, our lives wouldn't be capable of being meaningful. If they weren't risky and vulnerable, there would be nothing to lose. And it's only because there are things to lose that they can come to have the significance that they do. So yeah, I think I'm not against the idea that that's a deep way of approaching the questions at the core of existentialism. But as you said, I was worried for a while about how I was gonna teach it.
Well, I think there's a difference between suicide and not living. Because suicide is an action.
Yeah.
So it feels like to me, Like suicide doesn't make sense because, imagine you're in like a hotel and you're saying the room I'm in sucks, but like there's other rooms. So like maybe explore those other rooms. Maybe you'll find meaning in those other rooms. Like basically embracing the fact that you don't know everything.
Yeah.
And there's you need time to explore everything. It's like once you've explored everything, then maybe you can make a full decision. But it's unfair to make a decision. It's, I would say, unethical to make a decision until you've explored all the rooms in the hotel.
Yeah. And this gets focused in the brothers Karamazov, of course. There's one brother who is really asking that question, is asking the question of suicide. He's asking the question whether the world that we live in is a world that's worth living in. And I think that character's, as you say, very ill. I mean, and it's possible, and often because, as you say, of brain chemistry, physiology. So there's certainly a physical ground to that situation, to that condition. But I think it is possible for someone to be in that situation. I think that Ivan Karamazov, who's the character who's asking this question, is maybe let's say chemically depressed or something like that. But I think there's more to it too. And I think that Dostoevsky's real view is that the brain chemistry doesn't exist on its own. Like the way we interact with one another, the way we care about or isolate ourselves from others, the way we care for the lives that we lead, affects the chemistry of our brain, which goes on and changes the mood that we're in. So I think Dostoevsky does think that Ivan's salvation, if he's capable of being saved, is going to come through the love of his brother Alyosha.